Testing, testing, 1, 2, testing. Testing. Okay, perfect. Welcome everyone to another coffee tasting. I'm your host Aaron Taylor, and today we are exploring a exotic coffee, Vietnam de Lot by the Starbucks Reserve. This is the third year that Starbucks has offered this particular coffee from this part of the world. Very exciting because it's from a part of the world that you wouldn't typically find coffee in the past, and I consider it more of an exotic coffee because of the location it comes from. And then with this coffee, we're getting notes of toffee, cola, and cocoa. So we're going to get a nice, strong, bold coffee. And then with this coffee, it has a really interesting story. And then also, the way it's processed is different than most coffees around the world. It's very typical to the region of the world. And we're going to explore a little bit about the story and how they process their coffee there. So, for those of you who are joining me for the first time, welcome. It is an honor to have you. Your passion, your curiosity and passion for coffee is amazing. And then for all of those who are returning, it is an honor to have you back. If you're returning, that means that your passion for coffee um, almost rivals mine, or probably does rival mine, and you just want to learn, and just wanting to learn about coffee and what makes it so important is awesome because we get to pay tribute to the people who put a lot of work into providing us these beans. So I just want to thank everyone again. If you guys are joining me for the first time or returning, thank you so much for joining me for these coffee tastings. It is truly an honor. And if you truly do love these coffee tastings, please hit that like and subscribe button down below. It really helps me gain a lot more ability, allows me to have the ability to do more content and create more videos for you guys so that we can further explore the history of coffee, learn how it got to where it is, and learn how it impacts the farmers and community and environment of the people and where the coffee comes from. So very important, lots of cool stories, lots of stuff to learn on how coffee helps make the world a better place in terms of how we practice farming and how we practice ethical sourcing and fair trade. And so there's a lot of stories that we can learn through coffee. And just by learning these stories, we can use these stories to take these practices into other parts of the world, like other farming, and also just in the basic job industry where, we're learning to provide a fair wage and then also fair housing and stuff like that. And so by learning about how to treat each other fairly and how to create a more sustainable livelihood for everyone is going to make the world a much better place. And we can take these practices that we're practicing through coffee and extend them out to other parts of the world. And so that's what I think makes it so important to learn these stories, because we could take this as an inspiration, apply these things to other parts of our lives, and just make it a more thriving, sustainable community, not just for one type of people, but for everyone. So, really cool. I hope that all of you guys are inspired by coffee just like I am, and how it can impact the community and just change society for the better so that we can live more comfortable and meaningful lives. So, On this channel, I like to brew our coffee 3 different ways. That way we get to explore the different flavor notes that coffee has to offer. So with the different brewing methods, it's going to bring out different flavor notes in the coffee. And so with this particular Vietnam de Lot, we're getting notes of toffee, cola, and cocoa notes. And so with this, with the pour over, we're gonna get a little bit more of those cola and toffee nut notes. It's gonna make those cola notes a little bit brighter. And then with the Chemex, because we have that triple paper filter, we're going to absorb some more of those oils, so those cola and toffee nut notes aren't going to come forward as much. We're going to get more of those cocoa notes, and so we're going to get a more balanced cup of coffee. With the French press, it's going to be very similar to the Chemex, where we're going to get the full amount of sediments and the full amount of oils. So we're going to have that full body cup of coffee. We're going to get some strong toffee notes along with the cola and cocoa notes. So it's going to start off very bright, but then it's going to be more of like a mellow brightness, and then we're going to get that bitter dark chocolate notes as well. So if you guys are brewing a pour over or a Chemex, I just wanted to share with you that when you pour the first little bit of your water on top of your grinds, you want to let your coffee bloom. And what letting your coffee bloom does is it allows the air in between each of the grinds to rise to the surface. If we pour too much water on our coffee right off the get-go, we're pushing that air down instead of letting it rise, and it creates an air barrier at the bottom of your paper filter, and it slows down the brew process. And this is important because if we slow down our brew process, we're going to over extract our coffee, and we're going to end up with a super bitter cup of coffee. And we don't want a super bitter cup of coffee in terms of this, because it's going to be super unbalanced and it's going to make for an unpleasant flavor. And so making sure that we brew our coffee correctly is very important, to make sure that we pay tribute to the people who grow our coffee, and then also to ourselves, so that we can enjoy our cup of coffee instead of trying to struggle through it. So making sure that we get the proportion, grind, and freshness is important, but then also making sure that we properly brew our coffee and we're doing our methods the way that it's supposed to, so that we could get the best extraction out of our coffee, the flavors that's intended to the flavors that were intended to taste by the farmers. And so very, very important, guys. If we misbrew our coffee, we're doing a disservice to the people who brew the coffee, because a lot of work went at the farm to the processing plant to ship it to us, and then for us to brew it incorrectly at the final step. It's a waste, all that work prior. And so making sure that we brew our coffee correctly is very important for ourselves and for the people who put the hard work into making sure it got to our table. So really cool. So with this coffee, it comes from Southeast Asia, and we're going to get some really dark notes. And then also, this is a fully washed coffee, which means that they give it a bath until the mucilage falls off. And then because of this particular region, they have multiple cropping periods, so they don't have enough time to do a fully dried method. So they actually get the moisture of the bean to around 50%, and then they take it to a processing plant to sell the beans, because they actually don't have enough time on their hands to fully process the coffee. And the reason why they don't have enough time is because this particular region of the world allows them, and their demographic and their environment allows them to have multiple cropping periods or multiple harvest periods a year. And because their harvests are so close to each other, that they don't have enough time. They can't take those 3 to 4 months of drying, or however long it takes to dry their coffee, because by the time they're done drying and processing their coffee, their next harvest is already ready to be harvested. And so they only get their beans to around 50% of moisture, and then they ship it off to somewhere else to finish the processing of the coffee, and that's what impacts the flavor notes of this region of coffee, is because the fact that it's only dried to about 50% moisture, we're still absorbing flavors from the area and also from the container. So that's why we get a lot of those like cedar notes or those intense spice notes, is because of the processing method and also from the region of the world it comes from. So really cool to learn how processing methods and the region of the world will impact the flavor. And then also it's interesting to learn how depending on the area of the world you come from, it's going to impact your processing method and your drying method on the beans that you're growing, because of the humidity in the air, cloud cover, sunlight. And so depending on where you are in the world, it's going to impact your decision on how you process your coffee. And then with this particular area of the world, they actually choose their specific processing method because they have multiple harvest times a year. So they have to kind of keep up with that, and they have to get rid of the beans and send them off so that they're not accidentally stockpiling their beans, and then it's just harder to maintain. You get mold and stuff like that. So it's a lot easier for these farmers to just dry it to 50% and send it off to have it finished being dried or roasted at that point. Excellent. So first, we are going to try the pour over. With the pour over, it is a single paper filter. We're going to get some of a lot more of those toffee and cola notes, and then we're going to get some really subtle cocoa notes toward the end. And so the reason why we get those more brighter toffee notes and then the cola notes is because the paper filter is going to absorb those sediments and allow some of the oils to pass through. And those oils are going to impact the flavor and make it a little bit more of a brighter cup. Oh yeah. So with this particular cup of coffee, on the pour over, we're getting those really, really bright cola notes right off the bat. And then followed by those cola notes, we're getting a slight toffee, like a slight nutty flavor. And then as those flavors start to wash away, we're getting a really, really smooth milk chocolate notes. So we're definitely getting those cocoa at the end, and then the cocoa notes really linger on. This is a really good cup of coffee. And the reason why I say that is because, and it's personal preference as well, but the reason why I like this particular coffee is because I'm not a big fan of the bright citrusy notes. And so with this, we're getting cola and toffee as our bright notes, and they're not super intense like maybe like an orange, tangerine, or lemon would be. So with like those coffees, we get like super bright, intense notes right off the bat, and then we get those more of the milk chocolate notes that follow it. With this, because it's the toffee and cola notes, it's bright, but bright in a different way, almost kind of like a carbonated water bright. And so it's very subtle, not too intense, and then we get that nutty cocoa wash after the bright flavors start to dissipate. And so it makes it for a very, very smooth cup of coffee. Even on the pour over where we get a little bit more of the bright flavors, it's still very, very subtle and fairly balanced as well. It's a really good cup. One of my favorites in this region of the world, just because it's not too bold either. Because a lot of the coffees from like Sumatra and West Java and that area of the world, we get very intense cedar or spice notes, and those can be pretty bitter at times, and so it's hard to get a more balanced cup, but you get a lot of flavor. And so with this, because we're getting those cola, toffee, and cocoa notes, we're getting a really smooth, balanced cup of coffee all the way across. So now we're going to try the Chemex. With the Chemex, this is a triple paper filter, And so with that, we're actually absorbing more of the oils that makes its way through in the pour over. And so because we're absorbing some more of those oils, we're going to tone down that brightness. We're going to taste a little bit less of those cola and toffee notes and more of those chocolate notes. But at the same time, it's going to be a very, very clean, balanced cup of coffee because it's triple paper filtered. So we're absorbing those sediments and oils, making it a very pleasant cup of coffee and more balanced as well. So there's a noticeable difference between the pour over and the Chemex. And the noticeable difference is the level of brightness of the cola notes on the initial sip. So we're not getting as much of those cola notes. They're definitely there, but it's more of like brightening up the toffee notes. So we right off the bat when we taste this coffee on the Chemex, we're getting those toffee notes, almost sweet, bitter toffee notes, and then the cola brightens it up a bit, and then it starts to slowly wash away, and then we get that cocoa flavor. So this is actually a really, really good Chemex. Super smooth. It actually tastes darker than some of the other Chemex that I have, just because we're getting the nutty and chocolate notes together, which gives it a darker flavor. But in actuality, it's a very, very smooth cup of coffee, and it's much smoother in contrast to the pour over. Excellent. So now we're going to try the French press. With the French press, this is a fully immersed cup of coffee. In this, we're getting all the oils and all the sediments out of the coffee, which is going to impact the flavor. It's going to give us a lot more of those cocoa notes, and then it's going to have a much longer lasting flavor as well. So as I sniffed the French press, we're getting a lot of those bright aromas coming up off the top. Not a whole lot of those milk chocolate notes, which I would assume we would have been getting. That is really good. So with this, we're getting a really, really strong toffee flavor right off the bat. Like we're getting a really, really almost bitter toffee flavor, but then it's followed up by the bright cola, and with that, it gives it almost like a sweetness to the toffee nut flavor because our mouth is being bombarded with those bitter toffee, and then the cola, the brightness of this coffee kind of gives it a sweet note, and then it's followed up by the chocolate flavor. So in contrast to the pour over and the Chemex, the French press actually has a sweeter flavor to it just because we're contrasting those bitter notes that we get from the initial sip. And as it starts to clear away and we get those brighter notes, it gives it that sweet flavor because we're comparing the lack of flavor to the intense bitter notes of the initial sip. And then it's followed up by that chocolate flavor. So we get a bitter flavor in the very beginning, starts to sweeten up as the palate clears, and then as the palate starts to clear, those chocolate notes start to come forward. So we get a bitter toffee notes with sweet cocoa notes that follow it. It's hard to discern the bright notes in this cup of coffee because the toffee notes are so intense. We're getting a lot of those nutty notes right off the beginning, and those nutty notes is what's giving it that bitter flavor. And then as those bitters start to clear away, we get that sweet flavor, and it makes that chocolate taste sweet. Really, really good. This one's actually a hard one to decide which one is my favorite, just because all three of them have really great flavors. Normally, I tend to lean away from the pour over just because I don't like the excess oils compared to the sediments, which gives it a brighter flavor. I like a more bitter cup of coffee, but with the pour over on the Vietnam Delight, we're not getting too bright of a flavor because we're getting toffee and cola and not like a citrus, lemon, lime, or orange flavor. It's very interesting because the pour over, it's brighter, but it's not that much brighter than the other methods. It's got that bright quality from the very beginning from the oils, but it's not overly intense. And when I say overly intense, I just mean to my personal preference. There are people that will like that bright citrusy cup of coffee, and to them it's not overly intense. Because I tend to lean away from the citrus notes, any kind of citrus notes is intense to me. So for that reason, um, that's why I say overly intense, is because for me, I don't like the bright citrusy notes, and so I tend to lean away from them, and then any kind of citrusy notes is going to be intense to my palate. But this pour over is really, really good. So now we're going to learn a little bit about Vietnam de Lat. So Vietnam de Lat is has a very temperate weather. It's a perfect place to grow Arabica coffee, and it's so perfect that that's what causes them to be able to have multiple harvests a year, because they don't have to rely on a summertime and a wintertime, um, and they don't have to balance out with the weather. Because of the temperate weather there, they are able to have multiple harvests a year, and because of that, that actually impacts the processing method that they choose. And so with Vietnam de Lat is actually the capital of Lam Dang, I believe it is. And with this area of the world, it's shrouded in mists of and a pine forest, and then it encompasses a large lake. Um, an interesting part about this world is how the French in the early 1900s um, colonized this part of the world and turned it into a resort. And so it's actually one of the later areas colonized by the French, because it was still in the 1900s. And so with this, we have an area of the world that was colonized by the French because of its how you say, its perfect weather and the perfect environment for the it's the name Dalat translates to oh man, I forget, something everlasting springs or something like that. So it's really cool. There, just the name itself uh, tells us that this is a um, what's the I'm having a loss for words today. Uh, it's a paradise. That's the word I'm looking for. So this is a paradise of everlasting springs, and so it's just by that we know like how beautiful of a place this area is. And then it wasn't until later in the 1900s is when they started growing coffee, and with this particular cup of coffee, it's really helped invigorate the environment and the economy, and allowing farmers in this part of the world to create a sustainable economy for themselves. Because in the early days, we had the French colonization, and with colonization for most parts of the world, it has been a very negative thing where people are being relocated or their land is taken from them because the wealthy and rich royals want the land for themselves because they see an opportunity to create themselves a paradise. And so, with coffee making its way to this part of the world and allowing farmers to grow coffee, it's allowing the normal everyday person to create a wealth for themselves rather than the royalties um, keeping all the money to themselves. So it's really cool how coffee can impact an environment and create a sustainable economy, especially for areas of the world where a little bit more isolated, like the islands of Sumatra and a lot of the islands in Southeast Asia. And so, with this cup of coffee, it's really important to learn the stories on how it impacts the farmers and how it allows them to make money. And then the other cool part about this is because they have multiple harvest periods a year, they are actually able to provide us with a decent amount of coffee for the little bit of land that they actually have. Because you have other parts of the world where they have large swaths of land to grow on, large areas. They're not a tiny little island, or they're not isolated. And so with this, we have a very isolated region of the world. You can't just encompass the entire area in coffee farms. It's only that small little area, and because we have this small little area, normally in other demographics we will only be able to provide a limited amount of coffee. But because they have multiple harvest periods a year, they're actually able to keep up with demand and actually create that economy that they need to create a sustainable livelihood. So really cool to learn about how the different processing methods affect the people, and how this particular cup of coffee just really um, it balances itself out. Like nature has created a coffee that it grows faster, um, and allows the people of this part of the world to make the money that they need by being able to grow more coffee in a smaller amount of time, because they don't have the mass amounts of land to have larger farms, because they are limited with their elevation and the land that's at that elevation height. And so they're very limited in the amount of land that they can use, but at the same time they have multiple harvesting periods, so we have that balance of limited amount of harvest per harvest, but at the same time you have multiple harvests a year. So really cool to see how different demographics can change the way coffee grows and at the speed of the growth of coffee. There's a lot of really cool stories in this part of the world. And then with this part of the world, it's the key story for these is economical growth, because you have islands, like I said, that are isolated. They don't have the opportunity they don't have the opportunity to make a lot of money because they don't have a lot of land. You have these smaller islands that are very limited on what they can do and what they can grow. And with coffee, because it's so easy to grow in this part of the world, and we get such vibrant and exclusive flavors from this part of the world, there's such a high demand for the coffee, and coffee growers in this part of the world are enabled to make the money that they need. And so with Southeast Asian coffees and coffees from Sumatra, West Java, Indonesia, um, it's all about economy, and how farmers are able to create a sustainable economy through growing coffee, and how they are rebounding from French and Dutch colonialism from the early 1700s all the way up to the early 1900s, and really creating a society and a community that's built by them and not by people who came in from other lands. So really cool how coffee growers can use coffee to create a more sustainable economy and just build their communities themselves, and just learn and strive through the hardships of Dutch and French colonialism, and then learn and grow from there. So really cool. Thank you everyone for joining me on today's coffee tasting. I hope you guys learned a little bit about the Vietnam de Lot and how the French ended up colonizing this land because of the Eternal Paradise Springs, and how these people got their land back and now they're growing coffee. And there is still a resort on the land and a golf course, but most of the land now belongs to the natives, and they grow coffee. So that's the important part, is that the people were given back their land, and that they can continue to grow as a community and thrive through growing coffee. So thank you so much for joining. I hope you guys thought that this was an awesome story to learn about Vietnam, a very exotic coffee from an exotic part of the world where you don't get a lot of the same growing conditions in other parts of the world just because of the different season changes. And so, yeah, thank you everyone for joining today's coffee tasting. If you guys really enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button down below. And if you want to see more videos, hit the link above. That is going to be a list of coffee tastings that I've done in the past. And the link down below is just going to be a video that YouTube thinks that you might like. Thank you everyone for joining, and I hope your coffee was just as delicious as mine was.